The global trade in valuable exotic goods and spice is legitimized first by the Greeks, who pontificated exactly by what authority did they have the right to rule this place. And the Senate said, well, we must interpret what we observe as consistent reality to be the uncontested will of the gods. Anyone can come along and enforce their will contrary to what must be reality, what must be the will of the gods. And this became law. And if one could not be reasoned with to agree, then your agenda was that of harm, to force your agenda. First, do no harm. Or Ares does not favor your victory. This is the context in which the Jews wrote the Torah, which gave the prophecies that Christ was resurrected to fulfill. This establishes the laws and cultures, traditions, history of the people of that place. The ruling class of the Jews at the time were the Pharisees, judges who thought that God's laws outweighed the demands of tyrannical government, which is true, of course, but it's still susceptible to corruption and tyranny itself. The Pharisees were abolished not long after Rome fell, and we got the corporation. Islam was written 6 centuries later. It is an exploitation of the corporation in the vacuum of power created by centuries of holy war. Because after the Varian disaster, we focused all our efforts on the East. That's where the problem comes from. It's not the heretics, it's our spice, it's our money. So Islam would have never been written were it not for the systematic persecution of primitive Christians who inhabited the area at the time. This is where the Dead Sea Scrolls come from. With the Christians out of the way, and the Holy War is still raging, because it wasn't them, the legacy, the tradition of the Pharisees was revived, along with some Babylonian, Persian, Pharaonic, Stone Age slave raiding customs, to exploit the corporation. So you see, the Jews are blamed for not believing in the resurrection, because without the resurrection, the prophecy is unfulfilled. Meanwhile, by invoking a corporate model and claiming to be monotheistic, along with various traditions common to the Old Testament, and claiming that there is but one Allah and Muhammad is a prophet, they curated traditions which I see elements of Zoroastrianism, Mithraism, and Pharaonism. Everything the Jews spent 2,000 years trying to get rid of is back in the name of Christ. We're not asking you to believe anything that flies in the face of reality and faith. There was a miracle 2,000 years ago. Is God not allowed to work a miracle every 2,000 years or so? Some people want a repeat performance. Well, it's not a cookbook. What year is it? Anybody have a watch? Judaism represents the law, the kind of law where, There's certain reasons which might justify your intercession, and had there been any violations of it, they would have seen to it. You're not going to come take our kids just because they're human and act like you're affiliated with us. Christianity says, yeah, that wouldn't even work. Already happened. We're not buying any. Thanks. Take a hike. You see, Jerusalem, as long as the prophecy is fulfilled, the thing about the circumcision, I mean, it's not a handshake, obviously. It's more for the coroner than anybody. But these guys act like the source of our authority can be gamed for them to claim some kind of anti-sovereignty. How can I invade the round side of the planet with these morons? You call yourself a country? First, do no harm, or you're not a doctor. And if you can't make any promises, church is inherently separate from state. Or we wouldn't have a word for it. That's a religion. The Jews allow for it. Every once in a while they fail, and they're cool with it. They like it. And then they're like, oh, God's angry. All these years compiling bits and pieces of this understanding and just posting it. If anybody benefit from it or have any feedback. Meanwhile, I got retards, bearded ladies on wheels, no idea, showing up acting like, talking about any kind of a rejection of complacent ineptitude, complicit incompetence in Washington. They have some right to tell me to shut up. Any authority on behalf of Washington would be based on the freedom of speech. Muslims, lily white Muslims. After the failure of the German Union to prevent World War II, which was all their fault, not Turkey, because the Protestants think Allah is God. They don't recognize the distinction. When Jesus says, blessed is the one who was persecuted for my sake, so persecuted were the prophets before him, they think, oh, he's not talking about the Jews. It doesn't matter if it's one God or 50 or 51. If you don't recognize the distinction between church and state, you're Pharaoh. Christ fulfilled the prophecy. Buddha, not ours, but their prophecy, the source of their power is not based on a lot of baby snatching. We have this thing called marriage, and that's the soft style. And then we have the Republic, and you could consider that the hard style. Why do we keep bombing the Middle East, you think? Well, turns out they're too stupid to tell their Taliban means students, tell their Taliban that they're under no obligation to sabotage our inner workings and leaving their government holding the bag. And it wouldn't matter because we got Protestants. And turns out Islam works just as well with the Bible if you're not allowed to read it for 600 years. To this day, Protestants rather die than even look at a Bible. Civilization cannot exist independently of both church and state. First, do no harm. Because we are not your protectees. We are the pointy end. Do not invoke God to provoke us. Because if it bleeds, it's not a God.